Hi Pumpkin Muffies, this is Shauna with Love Meets Cake. Today I'm going to show you guys how to make a Finding Nemo cake, including that little cutie Nemo on top from Fondant. Super easy, let's go! The first thing I do when icing a cake is putting some buttercream on the cake board so that the cake sticks to it and doesn't slide around. This customer wanted a half yellow, half chocolate cake. So I made one layer of yellow cake and one layer of chocolate cake. Cut it in half so that way you have a 2-layer cake with 2 flavors. Super easy. Next, I'm doing a crumb coat, and a crumb coat is the first layer of icing that goes on, so it traps the crumbs in the icing. And then you put it in the refrigerator for it to chill for about 15 minutes until the icing is firm. Then it's ready for your final coat of icing. Next, you probably noticed the very bottom layer of the chocolate side was bulging out just a little bit. So I want my sides to be straight up and down as possible. So I trimmed the bottom layer of that chocolate side and re-iced it. Alright, so the cake has been chilling in the refrigerator for the past 15 minutes. It's nice and firm, so it's ready for our final coating of icing. And what I like to do is start by putting a glob of icing on the top of the cake and then using that to ice the sides of the cake. And that's just my preference, so I don't have to keep going back and forth with my spatula to the icing bowl there. So I iced the sides of my cake, and then I iced the top of my cake. Now the very next part is absolutely crucial to getting sharp, clean corners on your tiered cakes and not rounded corners. So as you can see, I'm actually building a icing wall around the top perimeter of the cake. And what an icing wall is where the icing is coming up just slightly above the top of the cake. And then what I'm doing is taking my bench scraper and I'm running that under hot water. And what the hot water does is it heats up the bench scraper. So when I'm running that along the sides of the cake, it's smoothing out the sides of my cake. So it's like you're ironing your cake. That way you're actually getting out any air bubbles that you have, any smudges in your icing, things like that. There's a couple different methods that you can use to smooth out your icing, and this is called the hot water method. Is my favorite one. So the next what I'm doing is taking my long handled spatula and I'm starting from the outside of the cake and I'm pushing in the buttercream so it creates that sharp corner there on your cake. So let me do it in slow motion. I'm taking it from the outside, bop, and I'm pushing that icing into the center of the cake. The excess icing I'm putting back into my icing bowl. Alright, let's do it again. Start from the outside of your cake. Booyah! And then I'm scraping off that extra icing into the bowl. Let's do it again. Bop! There we go. Bop! Alright, you get the point. Now, if you did not have that icing wall built up, you wouldn't be able to get those sharp corners. The icing wall gives you the ability to create those sharp corners with that technique that I just showed you. So next I'm taking my long handled spatula, I'm running that under the hot water as well to heat that up, and then I'm smoothing the top of the cake at this point. And there we go, our nice smooth tiered cake. Now next I usually clean up the icing along the base of the cake using my bench scraper, but this time because we're doing an underwater sea theme, I want to create sand using graham crackers, and I need the sand to stick to the buttercream, so I'm putting that extra icing on the cake board so that the graham crackers have something to stick to. I actually got a little overzealous with my icing, and now I have to clean up. I did a little bit too much on that. Now I got my graham cracker crumbs. I like the pre-crushed graham crackers, so I don't have to actually crush whole graham crackers, but it's whatever your preference is. Now I'm mixing in brown sugar into my graham cracker crust, and that's just something I like to do so that they're getting a little bit of sweetness in their graham crackers and not just raw graham crackers. But raw graham crackers is fine. Next, you can take some CMC powder, Tylose powder, or gum arabic, either one. All of those powders you can actually knead into fondant in order to firm it up. So this is what you can do in order to make shapes, objects, figurines. You want your fondant to be a little more firm so that it takes shape. So I like to rub some Crisco on the table so that way when we roll out the fondant it doesn't stick to the table. And we are going to make some green underwater sea plants. So you can see the shapes that I'm actually cutting out with my X-Acto knife. And then I'm going to twist it into a spiral shape. Next, I want to create some green plants that's on top of the cake that's standing upright. So I rolled my fondant out a little thicker, thick enough to where we can take our long toothpick and insert it into the center of it as far as it'll go. And as you can see, that's the thickness I'm doing. Now, one thing is that I'm actually making these objects same day of the cake. If you were to make these days in advance, you would be able to make your green leaves a little bit thinner because they would have several days to firm up, so that way it's firm enough to stand up on the cake without using the toothpick. But if you're doing it same day that you're doing the cake, you would want to make your fondant just a little bit thicker and use the toothpick so that the leaf is strong enough to stand up. Now also you can see I'm taking my fingers and I'm pinching along the edges of the leaf so that it's a little more leaf-like, and then you give it a little more texture and life to it. So here's another one. We'll take our long toothpick, stick it through the center of it. It's okay if it scrunches up because we do want our sea life to have some texture and life. And I'm taking my fingers and I'm pinching along the edges of it to thin it up so it looks a little more like a leaf, like a plant. Next, I'm going to roll out some white fondant, and I'm going to freehand cut out the name of the birthday boy. And I'm going to make it resemble as close to the name Nemo as possible, so I'm using those big block letters. Now my green shrubbery is firm enough, so I am now putting it in clusters on the cake. I usually like to do either 2 or 3 clusters of the green shrubbery. I think that looks the best. Now I'm going to make some seashells by freehanding. I do have a seashell mold, but I don't know where it is, so I just have to make it myself manually. So what I'm doing is taking some white, orange, and some light tan fondant. I'm rolling it together, however, I'm not kneading it all the way to where the color is mixed to one color. I still want you to see the 3 separate colors, because if you look at seashells, they have different tone colors in the seashells. So I'm taking this tool here that creates a seashell impression, rolling little balls, and then I'm just sticking that into the ball so it creates that impression. And then I'm taking my fingers and I am manipulating it to where it takes the shape of a seashell. So I'm flattening out the edges a little bit, and then I'm pinching the bottom so it looks like a seashell shape. Next, I am going to use a Wilton silicone mold here that I have with some sea creatures. And silicone molds are really easy to use. What I'm going to do is take my fondant and I'm pushing it into the mold. And I'm going to fill that cavity all the way, so make sure you take your fingers, you push it in all the way. You can even use a fondant roller to make sure it's down in there good. And then I'm going to take my small scraper tool, and then I'm going to scrape the top of the mold, so I'm taking off that excess fondant, and then the only thing that's left is the fondant that's filled in the cavity. And then I'm just going to pop that right out. Now, what I recommend is Googling underwater sea cakes, and you can look at the different cakes that other cake artists have made, because they have so many different underwater sea creatures and plant life and things like that. You can draw inspiration and figure out how to make your own underwater sea cakes. So you really, what you have to do is think about, you look at a shape and you think about how can you use your hands, how can you use the different fondant tools that you have, the silicone molds, in order to create those different objects that you want to make. Get creative with the colors, textures, patterns, things like that. These are also some fish I free-handed, and they're just going to be basic fish. Then I'll take my black edible food marker, just make some dots for eyeballs. next I wanted to make a wooden sign with the age of the birthday boy. So I have a wooden impression silicone mold, and I'm taking my brown fondant, rolling it over the mold, and then I'm just going to cut out a shape of a sign. Next is Nemo time, Nemo time. So we're going to take some orange fondant, and the first thing we are going to do is roll it into the ball. Make sure you have your Crisco down. Now this is where it's going to take some arm muscle, because when you roll it into a ball, you want to apply enough pressure to where it gets out the fondant wrinkles and creases, things like that. So see how it's a smooth ball? Next I'm going to take my hand and I'm going to rub it until it turns into like a cone shape. Now this is the part where when you're making objects, you have to look at the object, look at the shape, and you have to think, what can you do with your hands, your fingers, different tools in order to create that shape. So what I'm doing is I'm pulling the tail a little bit so it's thinner, so that it starts to look like a fin. So I'm just pulling at the tail a little bit, stretching out the body. Using my fingers there to make sure everything is still smooth. And there we go, the front part's the head, so we're keeping that circular. The bottom part is going to be the tail, so we stretched that out and thinned it out. Next, I'm just going to add the black and white stripes that Nemo has on his fins and on his body. Now all of this is still freehand. Remember, the best way to freehand something is to Google an image of it so you have something to look off of. What I like to do, for example, when I'm trying to make my Fondant Nemo, I literally Google Fondant Nemo, and it's going to pull up a whole bunch of other Nemos that a bunch of other cake artists have made. You can pick the one that you feel looks as easiest for you to do, and you look at each section of the object and then just try to replicate that best you can. So the Nemo has the lines in his fin. I'm taking my Dresden tool and I'm making those lines so it looks like a fin. I'm also going to do a top fin. And then I'm going to add the black and white stripes on top of those two and also the lines. Next, I took my ball tool and I poked in some holes so that way I can put the eyeballs into those sockets. So I'm just rolling some white fondant, sticking that in. And then I'm taking my Dresden tool and I'm just going to create a little smile on Nemo. And then as I'm looking at the image of Fondant Nemo that I googled, you can see he has the white eyeballs, he has the orange pupils, and then, well, the orange cornea, I guess. Fishes have corneas, I don't know. And then the black pupils. So I'm literally looking at a picture of a Fondant Nemo, so I know exactly where to put the stripes. I know exactly how to create his eyes, things like that. Always go off of a picture when you're trying to freehand something. The more you practice freehanding objects, the easier it'll get. You just have to train your eye to look at different textures, shapes, things like that. You really have to learn how to pay attention to detail. And I'm also doing the other side of his body where I'm putting the black and white stripes so he looks like a completed fish on both sides. Now I'm taking toothpicks and I'm using that to create his side fins. And then what I did was stick a long wooden toothpick into the center of Nemo. All done. I hope you guys learned a ton of tips and tricks and techniques on how to make your own underwater sea cakes. Remember, Google is your bestest friend in the whole wide world. Just Google a picture of what you're trying to make, and then just train your eye to be able to look at the detail, use your hands in order to create what you're trying to make, use your fondant tools, and you got it. Until next time, woo-hoo!